said, there was one mistake that I made that I need to correct. I said I ran track for the University of Michigan. I did not. I ran track for Ohio Wesleyan University. And interestingly enough, Ohio Wesleyan had a station wagon that looked like a hearse. And I used to drive that with team members to the away track meets. At Ohio Wesleyan, I also did the public address announcing for the football games. And we had a bunch of us that went up to Marion, Ohio, WMRN radio station, and had a call-in show one night a week. And I participated in that, went up to that one night a week. It was a lot of fun. But that also reminded me that what I left out when I was in high school, Royal Oak High School, that I acted in 2 senior plays. And the reason I remember it so vividly is that the director was gay. He used powder and rouge and lipstick and perfume. And he hit on me, but only once, because I let him know that I just wasn't interested. But he did tell me that, he said, Kimmel, said, you're a good enough actor to play the lead, but you don't look like a lead. So I played one of the subordinate parts. It was an interesting time. When I got out of medical school, I did an internship at Toledo Hospital, which is now Northwestern Medical School of Ohio. Toledo, Ohio was really a good internship. They let us do a lot of the actual work. Let us do deliveries, did the preliminary examinations and just diagnoses of patients that came in. It was really good. One of the interns, however, was from Turkey, one of my fellow interns. And he liked to eat garlic for breakfast. So no one wanted to work with him because he smelled so much, until we finally told him that he had to quit eating garlic for breakfast, or we wouldn't work with him. It was kind of funny. My wife delivered the first baby while we were at Toledo in the last month of my internship. So within a month, we moved to Florida. I think I said before that I had come down on a vacation with my wife from medical school in February, where the weather was gorgeous, sunny every day in the 70s, cool at night. It was beautiful. My wife was very enthusiastic about moving to Florida. We came down after internship to settle here, and we had an apartment that my father had. He had a bunch of apartments, but it was in June and July, upstairs, second floor, no air conditioning, in Florida in the middle of summer. And my wife wasn't too sure she wanted to stay, but we found a house, 533 Beach Road in west part of town. Nice house, no air conditioning, and no heat. And it was not too bad in the summer because it was a cinder block house and it was relatively cool with the windows open. But in the wintertime, we went through one of the coldest winters they ever had here. We didn't have any heat. I'd get up in the morning and turn on the oven so we could get some heat in the house. And I would go out and start the car and then come back in the house and let it run. So when I went out there, it'd be warm enough to drive. I went into practice when I got here with a gentleman that I had met on the trip that we took to Florida during my vacation for medical school. And he and I would practice together. He was a family physician, and I think I've already mentioned the fact that when I came down here, it was still a very segregated area. We had segregated waiting rooms that I changed after the first 6 months because I said, this is not right. And I also think I also have already said that we did still have segregated waiting rooms, but for a different reason. We were the city physicians for the city of West Palm Beach, and we did physicals on their employees. So we had one waiting room for everybody except the garbage people, and we had a separate waiting room for them because they smelled, and we tried to keep them away from the regular people. I got hospital privileges almost right away at Good Samaritan Hospital in St. Mary's, and had pretty much a full complement of what I was allowed to do. I did not do any kind of surgery by myself, but I did do deliveries. I delivered babies for probably the first 15 years of practice. I took care of the babies in the newborn nursery. I did the circumcisions. And believe it or not, my charges for doing a complete delivery, including taking care of the baby, doing the circumcision, was $75. First office charge when I came down here was $3 for an office visit, which was changed the second year to $5. So it was not an expensive time, but it was expensive at those times. West Palm Beach was quite a different town at that time. Military Trail was a 2-lane dirt road. What is now Palm Beach Lakes shopping center was a marsh. The Palm Beach Gardens had one house in it when we moved down here. And I had a friend of mine who was a dentist, and we used to go duck hunting just the other side of Military Trail where there were a lot of little ponds. And we would go out there before dawn, set up where we wanted to be, wait until dawn. The ducks would come flying in right towards us, shoot our limit of 2 ducks, go home, have breakfast, be done by 8 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd go to work. It was an interesting time. My first car was that I rented cars down here when I came here. It was a pretty good deal. We got Chevys, Chevy Impalas, and we got a new one every 6 months. No charges. I mean, we paid the rental fee, but we got a new one every 6 months. So, we never had any maintenance charges, and that was nice. After a while, of course, we stopped that and had our own cars. And my first car that I had down here was a Fiat Spider. But a Fiat Spider at that time was one of the, that model and other foreign cars were a problem because nobody had metric tools and nobody had metric parts. So if anything went wrong, you had to wait until it came from a distributor somewhere. So I didn't keep that car very long because if I ever had any problems, and I did have problems, you had to put it aside. Wherever it stopped, you left it while they had to go get parts. I had a lot of partners. Actually, Dr. Ambres was my first partner. He was the main partner. He'd been down here for years. He started his practice during the war. He was a family physician, but he actually did everything. He did neurosurgery, he did orthopedic surgery, he did deliveries, although he stopped doing deliveries when I came and let me do the deliveries. So he did everything. In the hospitals, as I said, I had pretty much complete privileges of whatever I wanted to do, which was nice. I did a lot of assisting at surgery. I had a number of surgeons who used to call me to come be their assistant. And I really enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. But a lot of activities that we did. I used to go out into fields and do skeet shooting, trap shooting. And I made a mistake one time of going out in the field with just tennis shoes and low socks. And I felt something sting my ankle, but I didn't see anything and I didn't pay any attention to it. The next morning, my ankle was 3 times its normal size and black and blue. And apparently I'd been hit by a baby rattler. And I was supposed to do an assistant surgery that day. I went there and it kept getting worse and worse and more painful. Finally I had to go home, put my leg up, put ice on it. I didn't have any long-term effect from it, but that taught me a lesson about never go into high grass without high shoes or high socks.
What would you say is the most memorable experience from your practice?
Oh, well, probably the most memorable experiences were making diagnoses of things that were very bizarre. You don't get a chance to make a lot of bizarre diagnoses, and I did. I had a chance to make a number of them, and they stand out in my mind. I was doing pediatrics, and I diagnosed a child with kwashiorkor, which is more of a tropical disease, and it's a starvation disease for children. I'd never seen one before, never seen one after that, but that was a unique diagnosis. Had a child that came in from the Glades who had tapeworms. And we had to rid her of her tapeworms, and she filled up a gallon bucket of tapeworms. And this was a little child. And the worst thing about it was she went back home, and 6 months later she's back again with more tapeworms. It turned out that she lived in a house with a dirt floor, and she would eat some of the dirt and get the eggs from that. But the other thing was making a diagnosis of porphyria, which is a enzymatic disease where the porphyrins in your body are produced in large excess and cause either belly pain or neurologic problems. They were either a neurologic porphyria or intestinal porphyria. I had one lady, a nurse aide, who had porphyria. I sent her to a surgeon once with a breast nodule. And the surgeon called me and said, Bernie, said, that's the first patient I ever saw with porphyria that didn't have a scar on her belly, because they present themselves with belly pain, and that's severe, and they end up doing surgical laparoscopy to find the pain, and there's nothing there. So that was one of my highlights. I have to say there were also a couple of very depressing times. I got sued twice. Once relatively early in my practice by a patient who came down from New York with neck pain. And the problem I had with that patient is that he had been seen a doctor, an osteopathic doctor, before me. And that osteopathic doctor had found that he had fever and neck pain, was treating with antibiotics and steroids. Well, I was going on vacation, so I turned him over to an internist. I never made the diagnosis. The intern took him 6 weeks to make the diagnosis, the bacterial endocarditis, which is a very serious infection of the normally settling on the valve in the heart. But the original doctor, the osteopath, had started the patient on antibiotics and steroids, as I said, and that masked the symptoms. So you didn't get a true picture of the problem. Anyway, eventually he died. I was sued, but they settled that for nuisance value. If you sue a doctor, you almost always get something, because the insurance company will settle just so they don't have to go to court, because it's a hell of a lot cheaper to settle for $10,000 than to go to court and pay all the expenses. And the second time I got sued was late in my practice. I had a patient come down from Georgia, a nice lady with her husband, elderly lady, who had a cancer of the ovary. And they had spread in the pelvis, and they took out all of her organs. And they told her that they had cleaned it all out and she was okay. And she wanted to come to Florida where it was warm to recuperate, so they said okay. And they asked me to check x-rays because she still had a little fluid in her belly, which I did. The fluid was pretty well gone, but there was a small little nodule there. And I called them and told them about that. But they said at the time, well, that they had assured her that they had taken everything out, so they just stayed. A month later, they came to the office, and my physician assistant, who was there that particular day, found that she had a huge mass in her belly. But this mistake I made was I didn't document that I had called her. And they said, well, you never called. Well, I couldn't prove I did call because I hadn't written it in my record, which was a lesson to me, to write everything down. She went back to Georgia, died very shortly thereafter. And while they filed a suit, they never followed through on it. The insurance company, again, paid them, I think it was $50,000. And I would have won if it had gone to court, but even winning, it would have cost the insurance company more than they paid them. So those are my two suits. I got involved in medical politics very early. I joined the Florida Medical Association and the Palm Beach County Medical Association, became a delegate to the Florida Medical Society, which I was for many years, went to all their conventions during that time. And then locally in the Palm Beach County Medical Society, I went through the officer regiment. I was the treasurer, then I was the secretary, then the vice president, and I'm finally president of the Medical Society. And it's interesting, it was 1972, and at that time osteopaths were not universally accepted as ethical physicians. And one of the speeches I made at the time was that we needed to accept the osteopath and integrate them into our hospitals because they were going to be a part of the medical landscape, and we really needed to accept the fact that they were there. That was not a popular idea. The thing that was the problem was that if you didn't give them hospital privileges, they could go to the red legislature and get permission to build a hospital just for osteopaths, which they did. Unfortunately, they couldn't make a go of it alone, so they started accepting medical doctors into the osteopathic hospital. Pretty soon there were more medical doctors than osteopaths. So the osteopathic group said, well, here we are again, we don't have a hospital of our own. So they built another hospital, built it out in Wellington, which is presently Wellington Hospital. But the same thing happened. But by that time, the osteopaths had upgraded their medical training and they'd been accepted into AMA residencies. So they were really very well trained. By the way, the first hospital was the one on Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard, which is now JFK North. It was Columbia Hospital when they built it. So anyway, at the same time, I joined the Florida Academy of Family Practice and went through that routine, became the president eventually. I did get an award as Family Physician of the Year. And I enjoyed practice. Where do we go from here?
I wanted to ask, you described the county about Military Trail being a dirt road, but how country was this? I mean, it's a county of 3 million people now. When you guys got here, what was
It's about 45 to 50,000.
in the entire county?
Yeah, and Good Samaritan and St. Mary's were two of the only 3 hospitals after Pine Ridge closed, the Black Hospital. After that closed, there were only 3 hospitals, those 2 and Belglade. There wasn't one in Boca, there wasn't one in Delray, there wasn't in Palm Beach. Palm Beach Gardens Hospital, by the way, is an interesting story. Before I became president of the Medical Society, I was, at that time, I think I was secretary or something. There was a public forum about medical care, and Russell Hoover, who was the president of the Medical Society at that time, got up and said, the problem we have in Palm Beach County is there are not enough hospital beds. And John D. MacArthur was there. John D. MacArthur was the recluse, multi-millionaire, had his own hotel, very hard to get along with. But anyway, he was at that meeting and he got up and said, if we need more beds, I'll build a hospital. So he did. He built Palm Beach Gardens. But then he wouldn't open it. It just sat there empty. And by that time, I was the vice president. And Carl Andrews and I went up to see him at his hotel up in Palm Beach Gardens and met with him. And he said, no, he's not going to open it because he's not going to be able to get tax-exempt bonds. Well, here was this empty hospital sitting there for I don't remember how long, but the pressure finally got to him and he finally allowed it to be opened. But that was an interesting experience dealing with him. When I first got to West Palm Beach, by the way, I was going to get a boat. And I took a powerboat squadron course. I took a powerboat squadron in seamanship, another one in meteorology, another one in weather forecasting, Never bought a boat.
Yeah.
Never bought a boat.
In that whole time? you
The
haven't-
whole time I've never had a boat, and I was very thankful because everybody has a boat, eventually gets rid of it because it's too expensive for the time they'll work.
Doc,
Yeah.
where I wanted to go next would be, we're gonna talk about your wonderful daughters,
Yep.
and then talk about politics, because I think there's some of those.
Which one you want to do first?
Let's talk about daughters,
Okay.
because I think you go through
My-
that, and then, you mentioned, I guess you had Mo when you first came here.
Well, Maurice was born in Toledo. She was born a month before the end of my.
Look at Ryan, don't look at me.
Maurice was born a month before the end of my internship. So she was a month old when we moved down here. Kathy, my second daughter, was born a year and a day later. And our third daughter, Lori, was born 2 years after that. Having all girls was something that I was used to and all, really, because I had 3 sisters. Sally, my wife, she had 3 sisters. My mother had 3 sisters. So I had nothing but women in my family for 2 generations. So that was not a problem. Lori was the mathematical smart one. We went to Disney World. Maurice fought like hell. She did not want to go to Disney World. She wanted to stay here and be with her friends.
How old were
She
you?
was 16.
16.
Kathy was 15. Lori would be 13. When I got up there, we stayed on the grounds, and they loved it, even Maurice, because we didn't have to be with them. They could roam the park themselves, and when it came time to eat, every time they had to figure out the tip, Lori had to do it because the other 2 were not very good mathematically. Maurice started out in high school to be a cheerleader, but her grades were not good enough, so she not a cheerleader. Kathy was a cheerleader and also swam on the swim team. And they had the opportunity to travel, and she even went to Peru with the swimming team. Lori also was a cheerleader. And she didn't do any sports, but she was also a cheerleader. Maurice was the troublemaker. I came out, woke up one night, and she was gone. Maurice had a bedroom of her own. Lori and Kathy had a bedroom, and Sally and I had a bedroom. Maurice's bedroom was at the far end of the house. The way this house is laid up, there's one bedroom laid out. There's one bedroom at one side of the house and 2 bedrooms on the other. And she had the one by herself. Went in there to wake her up. She was gone. The window was open and the screen was pushed out. She went out in the middle of the night, and actually early morning. When she came back, I actually was laughing. I said, Maurice, why in the world did you go out the window when there's a door not 15 feet away from you that's also at that end of the house? And she said, I never thought of that. She also got in trouble for writing an excuse for one of her friends and signing my wife's name to it, even though the excuse was for her friend. Needless to say, that didn't go over very well with
Was that friend Georgia, by any chance?
Yeah, it could have been. Actually, Georgia was more Kathy's friend.
Okay.
But that was funny. We had a number of girls who lived with us besides those 3. A girl named Kathy Gentry came to live with us because her family was moving away, and she wanted to finish high school here, so she lived with us. Another young lady, her parents had literally kicked her out of the house for some infraction. I don't know what it was. She lived here for a couple months until her parents agreed to take her back. So we had a house full of girls. I spent 28 years as the Forest Hill High School team physician. First 21 years, I never missed a game, home or away. Then I got hepatitis, so I missed a game. Then I went back and did it. But there was a very interesting and funny experience. It's at one of the football games, and I was usually the only doctor there. The other team usually didn't bring a doctor. And I got a call that I had to go to the bathroom, to the ladies' bathroom. I went in there, and this lady was sitting on the toilet, and she'd reached to wipe herself, and dislocated her shoulder, which is very painful. I set her shoulder and left. 2 weeks later, at an away football game, I got a call to go to the ladies' bathroom, and here's the same lady sitting on the toilet again and had dislocated her shoulder again. That's a coincidence that you really can't figure would ever happen, but it did. There were two football players that I remember to this day who were the greatest football players I ever personally saw. One was a fellow named Wayne Giardino, Canadian boy, linebacker, and he got hurt in his last year. I'd never really noticed him before, but he got hurt in his last year, hurt his knee. But it was one that didn't require surgery, so I kept him out, which irritated him, but I kept him out. And he finally got back the last couple of games, and he literally tore up the field. He was all over the place. I wanted him to go to Michigan. I wrote a letter to the university suggesting they recruit him, but he never heard. He went to Florida State, was All-American at Florida State, went back to Canada where he lived, where he's from, played football in the Canadian Football League, was all pro for 10 years until he finally hurt himself, but he was fantastic. And the other one was a skinny kid, was 5'11", weighed 185 pounds, named O.J. Anderson, but not that other one. This was Otis, not Orenthal. Good football player. Went on to the University of Miami. When he graduated, he started out at 5'11", 185. When he graduated, he was 6'3" and weighed 225 pounds. He had really gotten big, but he was All-American at Miami. Played pro ball for the St. Louis Cardinals at that time. They moved out of there after that, and the New York Giants, and was on the winning team for the New York Giants when they won a Super Bowl. So those are the two best football players I ever saw. Not a lot else things that went on during the football time, but there was one incident that kind of brings home the problem with concussions. I saw one kid that had a concussion. It was obvious he had a concussion, but the symptoms were bizarre. He lost vision in half of his field of vision. He wanted to go back in because he could see with the other half, but again, I wouldn't let him. But it brought home the problem of potential danger from concussions. One of the things that came up while I was practicing and had the three girls in school was I became interested in their education also because I was working with Forest Hill. And the teachers went on strike. Striking public teachers in Florida is illegal, but nonetheless they struck. And I was trying to get them to go back to work. And I decided then and there that maybe what I would do would be run for the school board. Well, I went to run for the school board and found out I didn't live in the right district, so I had to wait 2 years. But then in 1972, I ran for the school board and was elected. And one of the things that was going on in '72, still segregation. They were talking about integrating the schools at that time. With my opponent, who was on the school board, was running around school board meetings with a sign that says, "We will not integrate."
And this was 1972.
Yes, actually, I almost forgot. I ran in 1968, and I was favored to win, but I lost. So I ran again in '72 and was elected, and then I ran again in '76 and was again elected. But after 8 years on the school board, I felt that one of the big problems was that the Florida legislature was passing legislation which was not beneficial to schools. And that maybe what I ought to do was go to the legislature. So I decided to run, and in 1980, I ran for the school board. I ran for the legislature, and I was elected. I got up there. There's some really interesting episodes that happened. A fellow that I ran that was on another ticket, but running at the same time as Frank Messersmith from Lake Worth. He and I became very good friends. He also was elected. Frank was a ladies' man, and he always had these tremendous-looking women hanging on to him wherever he went. Well, they had an orientation program up there 2 weeks after you're elected. So Sally and I went up for the orientation. Frank went up, and he had this gorgeous girl with him in a knit dress that clung to her. And we were walking in the halls of the legislative body in the legislature, and everybody that went by, you could see them turn and watch her as they went by. It was really funny. The first committee meeting was in January, and I flew up there in January. They had flights up there at that time. It was hard to get to Tallahassee. Flew up there, got on the plane here, it was about 78. I got off the plane in Tallahassee, it was 19 above. And I didn't have an overcoat. I had a raincoat, but I didn't have an overcoat. And I said, if it's going to be like this, I'm not sure, I want to serve. I got to the legislature, to the legislative building, and they assigned me an office. The office was a converted closet, literally a converted closet. It was an oblong closet, much like you get with a walk-in closet. And the good thing about it, it was right across from the door to the parking garage, so I could park in the parking garage. We had parking privileges in our parking garage. I could park in the parking garage, walk in the door, take 2 steps, and I'm in my office. The bad part was that the first day I was there trying to move in, they tried to move in my desk. It's a pecking system in the legislature. If you're a legislator, you have to have a certain desk. If you're a committee chairman, you had to have a bigger certain desk. If you were the speaker, you had to have a bigger desk, so on. Well, they tried to get the desk into my office, and they couldn't get it in. It was a desk with an extension at the side, an L shape. It really was a riot to see these workers trying to get that desk into that, around the corner and into that office that was a converted closet. Finally, I said, listen, all I need is some kind of a desk and a bookcase. You give me that, and I'll be happy. So they finally did, because they could not get that desk in there. So there it was. My second term, though, I had a good office. But being in the legislature was probably the most fun I had, bar none, including practicing medicine. You get to learn more things and be involved in more things, even when you're not dealing with the committee you're on. You still have to deal with the legislation.
Do you remember some of the topics in the bill?
Well, I don't specifically remember any one bill. I put in, this is kind of interesting. Coming from the school board, I had several bills that I wanted to get passed. They dealt with textbooks and storage. And they're not huge bills, but they're important because they would save the county money. When you get up there, you enter your bills, you have the committee, they have a committee writing department. You go tell them what you want, they write it for you. Put in those 2 bills right away. You put your bills in during the committee hearings early, and then they come up later in the session. On the very first day of the session, both my bills came up for a hearing. And the buzz around the legislature was, who is this guy Kimmel? He's already got 2 bills up for passage. They read it one day, and then it has to come back for a second reading. Well, I'm talking about my bill, and then I finish with what I'm saying, and all of a sudden somebody pops up and says, I'd like to offer an amendment. Then another guy pops up, I'd like to offer an amendment. Another guy popped, I offer an amendment. And I looked at Frank, who was sitting next to me, and said, what the hell's going on? Well, they were just jostling with me because when it was all done, everybody withdrew their amendment. They passed the bill and gave me a container of salt to rub in my wound. When you get up there the first day of the legislature, there's just flowers all over the place. And little gifts like cups and things like that. I was on 4 committees: Education Committee, Juvenile Justice, Commerce, which is dealt with businesses, and what was the other one? Did I say Education? I don't remember what the other one is now. But I was on Education because, you know, that's what I was trained for. And the other one was Health. One of the interesting times I was not a really good bill sponsor. I was a good committee adjuster. Most of the bills go through a committee and they're amended to whatever needs to be done to make them palatable and passable. For instance, when I was on the Health Committee, we had one of the things that was coming up was a renewal of a bill that allowed hospitals to be built. If you didn't have this certificate of need, you couldn't get a hospital built or any beds of any kind. And the chairman of the committee, I was always a Republican. At that time, I have to say, first of all, Republicans controlled the House. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. The Democrats controlled the House. I was a Republican, like 79 to 41. So immediately you're assigned way at the back. You're in the last row with all the other all the Republicans. Yeah, you get preferential seating, but we're in the back with all the other Republicans. But I was sitting with friendly faces, so it was nice. Frank sat next to me. He was a trickster. He didn't like the light above it, so he went up there and unscrewed it. He got into trouble because he said, "You can't do that." He came back there and put that bulb back in again. But anyway, on this committee, the chairman was a Democrat, a pharmacist, and he was going to be gone when this certificate of need legislation came up. There were a lot of problems with it, a lot of problems. And literally, because I was the only one that really was that familiar with it, I rewrote the bill in the committee. And of course, later on it did pass. But that's where I felt I could do the most good, in the committees. I did introduce a bill to lower the drunk driving limit to .08. At that time it was .10. But I was a Republican trying to get something passed in a Democratic legislature, and so it never went anywhere. But interestingly enough, as soon as the Republicans took over, get these things backward, it passed. So now it's .08. But that was my bill originally.
So you had that before.
Yeah.
Doc, I've got a quick question. This will kind of go around. Your entire life, you've been a giver. From when you were young in your medical practice what motivated you? I mean, because you and Lori even have been going into the hospitals. I don't know when that stopped to do the inspections in your 80s.
In the prisons.
In the prisons. I'm just curious, reflecting back on all of it, what drives you to give?
I have no idea. I enjoy doing it. You know, what can I say? I see something that I think needs to be done or where I can help, and I just want to do it. No thought process involved, really. I just do it. You brought up an interesting thing, that one of the things I was doing was working for the Correctional Medical Authority. That came about because a prisoner in the prison system named Costello sued the state of Florida, charging that health care in the prison system was so bad it constituted cruel and inhuman punishment. And the federal government agreed with them. And they insisted that Florida had to do something to improve it, so they created the Correctional Medical Authority, and sent teams around to the different prisons to evaluate health care, make recommendations and improvements. And I did that. Normally we would go for a 3-day trip, looking at hospital records, not examining patients, but talking to the inmates to see what the care was like, observing. I took Lori with me several times. She enjoyed it. We got paid to do it, but it was really interesting. I do think that I had a positive impact. I know I had a positive impact in the treatment of asthma, because after finding a couple of deaths from asthma that were totally preventable, and I raised such a holy hell about it each time, that finally they passed a protocol for asthma to try to prevent these deaths. What they were doing was somebody would come in with an acute asthma attack and they would treat them, give them steroids, inhalers, get the asthma under control, send them back to the dormitory. But the problem with that is in acute asthmatics, you get the asthma under control, 6 or 8 hours later, when the medication wears off, they have an attack. And it happened in the middle of the night, and if you can't get to them soon enough, they'll die. And they had several deaths. So I feel pretty good about the fact that I had at least that change in the protocol. But I used to do the autopsy reports, and there were some really bizarre cases. One 30-some-year-old woman who was being sent to prison, when she got to the intake center, they examined her and found a lump in her breast, which was reported by the doctor. Said wanted to get mammograms, which they never did. And they went to the prison where they have to have a physical, and the doctor who did the physical said there's a lump in her breast, but never did anything about it. And about 12 months later, the woman died from metastatic cancer of the breast, a preventable problem. The prison system paid for everything. I always joke that if I ever got cancer, the thing to do is to go to the prison system because they have to pay for all your care. They had one inmate who stands out because he had been shot in the face, and a lot of his jaw had been severely damaged, and they were paying to completely redo his face, even though it happened in the commission of a crime. They still have to pay for it. AIDS was a big problem, and it was tough at that time to get adequate treatment for AIDS in the prison system. Anyway, that was another.
I have another question now. Go ahead.
When we were talking about politics, one thing I just wanted to go back to is you were a Republican in a Democratic run. Did you find that so right now,
That's my question.
there's sort of
It's exactly the same.
okay.
The party in rule, in control, does not kowtow or allow much in the way of opposition success. If you can get something on the agenda in the first 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, you have a good chance of getting it passed. After the first 4 weeks, forget it. All the bills that came up were Democrat-sponsored. I co-sponsored bills with some Democrats, and they got passed, but as a co-sponsor, not as a primary sponsor.
Did you find that to be a relatively available avenue for Republicans and Democrats at that time to work together on certain
Yeah, it was a lot better than it is now. That's for sure. Yeah, we'd work. As I say, that the Democrat committee of the chairman of the committee I was on, he left me in charge of the committee,
right.
even though I was a Republican. Another success I had that was never rewarded was in the Commerce Committee. I was on a subcommittee called the Small Business Subcommittee, and they were rewriting the regulations. And one of the big hassles in the writing of this was, should you give a preference to minority businesses in contracts? That's still a problem, but at that time it came up. I have to tell you that the committee I was on was 4 Democrats and me, a Republican. This is a very sticky issue. Nobody wants to touch it. So the 4 Democrats turn to me and say, you write that section. So I pondered and I wrote a section that was acceptable to the Democrats. And that was part of the bill that passed. And the black community was so happy that it passed that they had a party to celebrate. They invited the 4 Democrats and did not invite me, even though I was the one who wrote that section of the bill.
Oh, wow.
So that just tells you what being a party member was like.
So having, you talked about how you said it was even more fun for you than your medical practice. What reason did you decide not to continue?
I lost. I ran in 80, as I said, so I served from 80 to 82. I ran again in 82, and a gentleman named Ed Healy beat me, so I was out. I ran again in 84 and beat him, so I went back. So at the end of my second term, 6 years after I started, the Republican Party came to me and said, would you please run for the Senate seat in that district? I was not too enthusiastic, but they implored me to do it, so I said, okay, I'll run for it. The lady who ran against me was really incompetent, but she was a Democrat. The 1980 legislature had gerrymandered, no, it's 82, after the census of 1980 and 1982, the legislature had gerrymandered the districts to favor certain districts to be Democratic. That was the district I was in. Literally, I won the Palm Beach County. It was supposed to be a Palm Beach County seat. I won in Palm Beach County by 4,000 votes. I lost in Broward County, where they had a huge Democratic retirement community, by 6,000 votes. So I lost the election by 2,000 votes. And what was irking was that one of the most prominent Democratic members of the legislature at that time said that I was a far better candidate for the seat than the Democrat was, but because she was a Democrat, he was going to support her. So, kind of ironic justice. Anyway, I enjoyed it. We did a lot of stuff. We were, one thing that I missed out on was we were supposed to go to Cape Kennedy and watch a launch of a rocket. Well, the time we were supposed to go there, they scrubbed the rocket launch, so we didn't get to go. But we went to Disney. We went to Disney World on their dime. Got to go underground to where all the activities go on, where the trucks come in for supplies, wherever they all change costumes. We got a Class 1 tour of Disney World. It was a lot bigger since then, but it was nice. A lot of other things that were perks. They had a hunting weekend where everybody in the Republicans were invited to that as well as the Democrats. But you went there and stayed for a weekend and went deer hunting. Never saw a deer, but went deer hunting. Another time, they had I guess you'd call it a riding weekend. We all went to a rural area, not too far outside of Tallahassee. We had a trailer that we stayed in, and all the farmers and ranchers around brought horses in for us to ride. So I got pictures of that. We rode horses for a couple of days. It's interesting thing was after we got there, and we borrowed this trailer. Well, the second day we were there, get ready to leave, Frank found a stash of marijuana. At that time, marijuana was the drug, not cocaine. Which, if we'd have known about it, we could have gotten arrested. But nobody knew, so I didn't get to that. One of the times I got invited to go on, this is one of my most famous stories. I got invited to go on a long weekend, just 3 of us, to Cedar Key, anyway, just north of Tampa to go hunting on some people's private property. It was deer hunting season. I had never been deer hunting. The people there gave me a rifle, a deer rifle to hunt with. Took me out to a deer blind. I sat, and it was raining a lot. I sat in that deer blind, and of course never saw a deer. But I wanted to be, I'm all dressed up in my raincoat and hat, and I wanted to be safe, so as I had to climb down out of the tree, so I unloaded the gun because I didn't want to drop it and kill myself. Climbed down out of the tree, and I'm walking back to the area where they were going to get picked up. It's still raining. Here comes this big boar, this wild pig, walking up this pathway right towards me. It wasn't any farther than that bench right there. And I'm trying to load the gun. Well, in my haste to load it, I jammed it. I had a pistol, an automatic, but I left it back at the house because it was raining. I didn't want to walk around with that thing. Damn pig just looked at me, turned around and walked into the brush. That was one of my hunting experiences. I have to tell you about another hunting experience too. These are not related to my practice or the legislature. That was from the legislature, but this time a friend of mine, the dentist, who I shared an office space with, he had a place out on Lake Okeechobee. So we were going to go duck hunting. He's the same guy I used to go duck hunting with when I first got here, just the other side of Military Trail. So we went out to his place. He had about a 35 horsepower outboard. We started out before dawn, and he knows his way around. So we go out through the lake, and we go for about 30 minutes to get this spot. Great spot, you know, reeds around. You could sit the boat into the reeds, and you sit there and wait. At sun up, the ducks just come in right at you. So 2 ducks were coming in right at us. Got close enough, I stood up and shot. He stood up and shot. We both shot at the same time. The boat tipped sideways, the water poured in, and down we went. There was about 3.5, 4 feet of water, so it was not dangerous, but it was a little bit of a surprise that we just both shot, and the boat sank. Well,
Duck at least?
I have no idea whether we do or not. I was too concerned about whether I was going to live or die. So we got the boat up and tipped it over. We were standing, so we could do that. We got the boat up, tipped it over, got back in the boat. But of course, the motor wouldn't start. So we're stuck out there in the middle of the reeds, way over in the outskirts of Lake Okeechobee, trying to figure out how we're going to get home because we didn't even have a paddle. Luckily, we hailed a boat, thinking maybe they'd send help to us. Well, they had an extra motor. It was a little 3.5 horsepower. We went there with a 35, and we had 3.5 to go home. So we're putting all the way home. Took us most of the day to get back. Very unsuccessful trip.
Your hunting career was
My hunting career wasn't over yet because we went hunting here out someplace near Corbett, group of us and 2 jeeps, and it was getting late and hadn't seen anything to hunt. And the jeep I was in had a dog box on the back. We're driving along and we come to a ditch, and the guy goes down the ditch and guns it to go up the other side. Well, the dog box gets hung up on one side of the ditch. The bumper got hung up on the other side of the ditch, and we're hanging there, you know, in the ditch, front and back, and it's getting dusk, and we said, oh shit, now are we ever going to get out of here? But the other jeep came looking for us, and they had a winch, and they towed us out. So my hunting experiences were not very good. I did go hunt, I did duck hunt, did go deer hunting once in Minnesota. Nothing bad happened except it was colder and blazes and a foot of snow and tramping around, never saw anything to shoot at. Another one of my fiasco hunting trips. The best hunting I ever had was when, early on, when I told you that we used to go across Military Trail. There were a couple ponds there, so we could walk there and get our ducks to come home. Sally used to say that she loved the ducks because they had no fat. Wild ducks don't have a lot. But you had to be real careful because the buckshot was hard to eat.
Oh, yeah. Peeling them out, yeah.
Yeah, and you had to peel the feathers off. You know, they didn't come all feathered, nude like they do in the store when you buy them. So it's interesting, yeah.
So at this point, you've gotten through the 80s. Now you're coming into the 90s.
Just when Medicare started coming to track, and
Yeah.
you could see the end in sight as far as I was concerned. I was not too enthusiastic about HMOs, but it was getting more and more HMO business, which required more and more paperwork. And you could see the government starting to require things to be done so that it was not the kind of ideal practice that it used to be. Also, with the HMOs, one of the problems that I saw personally was people were mad because a lot of times they had to change doctors. The HMOs were in flux. You know, sometimes they had different doctors. You went to one doctor for a long time, and your HMO changed doctors. You had to change, and that made them angry. So I began to see that medicine was dealing with patients who were getting angrier and angrier, less and less fun to deal with. And then you start thinking about, well, how long do I want to do this? I joined an HMO personally because when I got to be that age, when I was 70 and retired, I joined an HMO. I still belong to it. And they've treated me very well, but I'm on the other end. I get things done with, might not even be able to afford if I was a normal person and seeking medical care. But that was starting to get me a little bit upset. I had, when I first went into practice, medical practice, oh, by the way, one of the things you had asked me earlier was, why did I go into family practice?
Yeah.
When I was in medical school, everybody wanted you to go into a specialty. Each specialty encouraged you to go into their specialty. But I just wanted to treat people. I didn't want to be held down to one type of practice. I wanted to be able to do a little bit of everything. So I just decided to hell with it. I did family practice, and I did a family practice internship. When I finished the internship, you could practice without a residency.
Okay.
So I came down here and started practice right away. They didn't have a specialty in family practice at that time. You know, and then they started having family practice residencies. But there were a lot of us who hadn't gone through a residency. So in order to make a way for us to become board certified, they had a test. If you passed the test, you could be board certified. So I took it, I passed it. I was now board certified, and this was in the early 70s, I think it was.
Did you get that certificate?
Or
Or did that one disappear?
No, I had that, but I never bothered taking it home when I left the practice. They were the first family practice certificate. They were the only ones to start out with that you had to retake the test every 6 years.
Oh, wow.
They gave you a year's leeway, so you could have actually up to 7 years to take the test, but the certificates were only good for 6 years. So if you wanted to be board certified, you had to take the test every 6 years. And I did. I took it, I think, 4 times. Passed it every time. But the last certificate, board certification I had would have ended in 1997. and I was getting to retire. So I retired right at the end of my board certification.
You did well.
Yeah. And I also had turned 70. And while I was in pretty good health, I wanted to get away from what was turning into a more unpleasant form of practice. I never do it. Most of the time, my pleasure during that time was the things I was doing outside of medicine. They were like my vacation. Sally and I both bowled. I bowled in the men's league, she bowled in the ladies' league, and we bowled together in a mixed league. We both started playing golf. Well, first of all, I had to teach her to play golf. I took her out to a golf driving range on Belvedere Road and then put her into the charge of a pro to teach her how to play golf. I had an old set of clubs. My oldest sister played golf, and her clubs were what I learned to play on. And they were the really old gloves. They had hickory shafts, and the names were like Niblick and Mashy Niblick and Spoon. They weren't numbered like they are nowadays. Anyway, Sally had these clubs to learn to play golf with, and she took a terrible ribbing from the pro. He said, kept telling me, why don't you get your wife a set of reasonable golf clubs? And I said, when she learns to play and wants to play, I will get her a set of clubs. So she got very interested in the game, and of course I did buy her a set of clubs. She became an avid golfer and a pretty good golfer. But whenever we went any place on vacation, and after the early years, she wanted to go someplace to play golf, which is fine. I wanted to go on a cruise. And so I tried to figure out a way we could accomplish this, and I found a cruise where 4 days, 4 days and 4 different ports, you got off and played golf.
Oh, wow.
So she said, "Oh, that sounds good. We'll do that." Well, actually, one of the ports was St. Andrews, this was right after Andrews, and one port was demolished, so we could only play on 4 instead of 5. But she loved the cruise. From then on, we'd go on cruises.
That's